Anyway, welcome to Navigating LA's Future Post-Wildfires. I'm going to spend about 2 minutes talking about why we have this particular group of people, and then I will introduce them and I will start asking them questions. In the immediate aftermath of the fire, I reached out to my counterpart at UCLA, Stuart Gabriel, and who had my job here at USC before he was at UCLA. And I said, we need to do something. I'm not sure exactly what it is. And he said, well, we are going to convene a group of people at UCLA next Friday, and how about the Lusk Center board and the Ziman Center board both be invited to participate in this event? At the same time, they coordinated with the Urban Land Institute, of whom Clare De Briere was the local chapter chair, and Lew Horne is about to become, is it about to become, or you are? About to become the local chapter chair. And you know, Stuart and I are academics, which means we like to think, but we're not great at organizing stuff, whereas Lew and Clare are brilliant at organizing stuff. And so we basically put together a group that created a report that is available online. It's 185 pages long, so you know, we'll quiz you in 2 weeks from tonight. We're going to be sending you all emails. With 10 chapters in it that had subject matter experts contribute to all 10 chapters. So Kev Zorian, who is chair of the Lusk Center Advisory Board, and I were in charge of the finance chapter, for example. We had people in charge of infrastructure, we had people in charge of insurance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we turned around this product in, Lew, was it 6 weeks?
6 weeks.
6 weeks, okay. So, again, in academia, that never would have happened. No academic would ever let anything out the door in 6 weeks, but we did. And so I would strongly recommend that you read it. We are now working on 2.0, and so we would welcome ideas, critiques, etc. Don't be too harsh, but if you see something that's wrong, we want to hear about it. If you think there's stuff that's missing, we want to hear about it. This is a living document, and one of the nice things about living in the age of electrons is all documents can be living documents, and so we welcome feedback, even if it's just on one part of the report. There is an executive summary at the front of the report. It's about 5-6 pages long, so not quite the heavy lift that reading the whole report is, but it's all worth reading. People really put a lot of time and effort into it. So let me briefly introduce our panel. These are all people, if you Google them, you'll see that they're all fabulous. So I'm just going to give a very brief introduction so we can get down to business. Immediately to my right is Clare De Briere. Clare has just started her own company called Catalyst. I think she is still probably pretty well known for working with Wayne Radkovich and doing some of the most amazing redevelopment work in the city of Los Angeles. My favorite piece is if you go to the corner of Wilshire and Western, the Wiltord Theater building, a magnificent Art Deco building that I didn't know until Clare told me was on verge of being torn down at one time. Yeah. And so thank you for saving it, and a number of other things too.
I was in grade school when it got saved, but you're welcome.
Oh, so that was just Wayne who worked. I thought you worked on that too.
I did. I built the market behind it.
Oh, you built the market behind it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right, okay. Well, still, when I'm giving you credit for something you didn't do, don't correct me. It's one thing, she worked on the block, right? Mm-hmm. That you really worked on,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Okay, in downtown Los Angeles, so I'm sure you're familiar with that. Next to Clare is Scott Laurie. Clare is president of Olson Companies. They're a home builder.
I have not changed my name to Clare, by the way.
Did I say Clare?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, I'll take it.
Scott.
It's all good.
Scott Laurie. See, I'm looking at Clare, and so I said Clare. Scott Laurie, who is CEO of the Olson Companies, who do something really remarkable in Southern California is they build new housing that people can more or less afford. And when I say more or less, that's not in any way a criticism of what they do. That you even get to more or less in Southern California is really remarkable. I've seen his product just recently in Claremont, and it's beautiful stuff that actually, a married couple making decent incomes but not extraordinary incomes could afford, and really well designed, and he's just so thoughtful about how to do things efficiently while still creating communities. Very impressive. Next to him is my wonderful colleague, Santina, I'm getting old now. Contreras, thank you. Gee, I get your name wrong, I forget your name. Maybe I should leave now. Santina joined us in our urban planning faculty a little more than 4 years ago. She is an expert on both sort of community engagement and natural disasters. And if you think about the two things that we're really talking about tonight, it's community engagement and natural disasters. Also, she is a very entertaining speaker, so it is great to have you with us. And last but certainly not least, Lew Horne. Lew runs CBRE here in Los Angeles. Lew is a stalwart in the community. I don't know how Lew does it. No matter where I go, Lew is there. And I'm sure I am often not there where Lew is, so it's really impressive how he gets around. And one of the things about Lew is he's a visionary in terms of the world of the office market. If you haven't visited the CBRE office space in downtown LA, I'm inviting people for you.
Yeah,
maybe
perfect.
I shouldn't. You should see it. I mean, he had a vision, what is it, about 10 years ago now, that people wanted to work differently from the way they'd worked in the past. And so he set up space that allows at the same time for creativity and collaboration, but also when you need a little privacy. It's there, and it's just gorgeous space, and you could see people wanting to come to work there. So really impressive. So I'm going to start by asking two of the people who produced the report, Lew and Clare, because we can't cover the whole report tonight, but for you, what are the three big takeaways of the report? And let me start with Clare, and then I'll turn it over to Lew.
I was so
Clare.
hoping you were going to start with Lew.
Oh, you want me to start with Lew?
Yeah, start with Lew.
Okay, Lew.
Well, first of all, thank you, Richard. I would say the report is really 10 reports. We had 10 different lines of leadership and also subject matter experts that went an inch wide and a mile deep on topics like case studies. One was the hazardous material, one was the vertical build, another was the horizontal build, another was the fast-tracking the permitting process, and the idea of self-certification, where we could take certification from a year down to 30 days, including not just self-certification with architects, engineers, and contractors, but also putting an AI cap on top of it and behind it to make sure that it was accurate and correct. The other was really the idea of testing, which is a huge topic right now. And is there a need for testing when the Army Corps takes 6 inches when the protocol typically is only 3? And we went deep then. So I'd say the big takeaways that I see, Richard, really number one, and we're still studying these, is what do we do now with testing, with environmental testing? You got 12,000 sites that have got, and we've actually answered the question, you're going to need a test. Even though the protocol of a 3-inch protocol of soil removal went down to 6, the Army Corps says it's fine. Truth is, the banks say it's not. You got to have a test, an individual test. So we've got a lawyer, we've got some environmental engineers going through, coming up with a standard test so that we can actually have a price point which is reasonable and the testing companies know exactly what to test for that'll be acceptable to the banks. So that would be number one. Number two would be the self-certification. And that idea of taking that 1-year process where 3 months it can take for actual planning, we can do that with an AI program now in less than 10 minutes. And so there's AI companies. I see Steadfast back there. They're working with an AI company. There's other AI companies that are out there that actually can reduce that cycle time with preloaded data on all of the building codes, all of the planning codes, all the setbacks, and the placement of a house, and you can just make it a streamlined process, which we believe is really the right thing to do. And then the other piece, which we think is going to be critical, is going to be the idea of this. There's a big gap between most people who are underinsured. If you insure for $500 a foot and the house is going to cost $1,000 to build, you've got a big gap. We're also going into an interest rate market that used to be 2 or 3%, and now it's 7%. So there's going to be a doubling of that, whatever that mortgage rate was. And then you've got the issue of insurance. You've got how much insurance are you going to pay post, and then the issue of supply chain issues. The materials are going to cost more. So the idea we've got, and also we're working along with Steadfast and others, is this idea around a builders alliance where we could have large builders and medium builders that could have pre-approved permitting so that we could go through that process quickly and they can build to scale, working with merchants like a Home Depot that actually can buy in volumes, rail volumes, and actually discount it, so hopefully we can bring those price points down so that that resident can remove into the house. So in summary, the three would be self-certification, the Builders Alliance, and then the analysis around a standardized environmental test that is acceptable to the banks and one that can be delivered at a reasonable price.
So just could you, on the self-certification piece, could you talk a little bit about what kind of political process would be required to get that done?
Sure. Well, it's a bad name. We're going to change the name to really a professional certification because at this point, the city or the county, they're not liable for any kind of oversight or anything anyway. So really, the liability falls to the architect, the engineer, or the general contractor in any kind of a defect anyway. So the idea would be to pre-approve and even insure around those three professional sets, and then I'll create a process whereby if there is an issue with any one of them, they get a warning. If there's 2 issues, they're out. So the idea, you'd have pre-approved architects, engineers, and contractors that could just self-certify or professionally certify the planning so you're not going through a series of 12 or 15 inspections. So if we front-load the permitting process with a self-certification process and then actually have each one of those different professionals certify, it just streamlines the process down to, like I said, we think we can do it in 30 days. The lawyers think that we can do this in 30 days. And without that, you're talking about a 1-year build on commencing at the end of the infrastructure build. So that's probably that could be a 4 to 5 year process easily.
Claire?
So I'm going to add one thing to that, and then I'll give you my 3. It just needs to be codified. Like, it needs to be turned into law. And Nitha Raman in the city of LA is working actually with our team on doing just that for the city. But then there's a process that has to go through to be approved by the city council. And I think the county is moving forward with it as well. And again, it just has to be turned into law. And basically what they're using is our outline. I'm going to take a slightly different tack than Lew on what was most impressive to me in this document. One of them was the alacrity with which the private sector jumped on this and said yes. That not a single person that we reached out to between the Lusk board, the Ziman board, ULI members, not one person said no when we asked them to do this. That was number 1. Number 2, the speed with which we were able to produce this document. I think I could be a university professor now too, because I went in there and I said to all these, leaders of our community, I was like, you need to get your report done in 2 weeks. I want to see a draft on my desk in 2 weeks. And
she was a pain.
No joke. But we got it. And we got these amazing pieces of work in a very, very short period of time. And it would take about a week to work on it, to put it all together and turn it into this document. But the speed that we were able to do this, to actually have it be meaningful and impactful, is pretty significant. And then the third thing was at first that we had this really sort of negative reaction from both the city and less so from the county, that you're just a bunch of greedy developers who are going to try to come in and take over. And it took a second for us to be able to say, look, USC, UCLA, and the Urban Land Institute are all three education and research institutes. This is what we do. We are all volunteering our time, 100% of our time. No one is getting paid to produce this report. And it took a minute for them to sort of buy off. And I feel like that, in that very, very beginning of this process, it would have been faster had we had more buy-in from the city and the county. We got there, which was great, particularly, and the county seems to be moving a little bit faster than the city, but that, having to go over that hurdle with the organizations that we have, these three institutions that we have, I found that a little bit surprising.
So one thing I do want to give a shout out to Gail Behrens from ULI, who sort of took our drafts, and she's a professional writer for the Urban Land Institute and did a really nice job creating a coherent document.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think it would have been hard to do it. And I see Lisa Davis here from ULI. Is they also did contribute money for sort of doing the editing and doing the distributing and so on. So I do want to give a shout out to ULI for that.
That Friday after the fires started, the governance committee for the Urban Land Institute, which is all of our former district council chairs, came together. We invited Lew as our incoming chair. Poor thing, he had no idea what he's getting into. And we agreed on an ask for the headquarters for ULI. And we said we need two things. One, we need money from the foundation. We don't know how much. We're going to say initially $150,000, but it may be twice that, it may be 5 times that. We don't know. Second was, we need you to dig into your research and find us examples of where ULI has done advisor service panels post disaster, whether it was man-made disaster or natural disaster. So within over the weekend, we got confirmation of the funding request, and then we got the advisory service panels from post 9/11, post Harvey, post Superstorm Sandy, post Marshall Fire, post Sonoma Fire, and the ULI report on resiliency. There's another one in there. There was one in Puerto Rico, and these reports, we all kind of dug in and read, and from that we were able to come up with sort of best practices, like what were the things that really worked, and equally as important, what were the things that didn't work. And we were able to consolidate that, and that ended up sort of becoming our blueprint for these work streams that Lew was mentioning.
I would just put a fine point on that too. We had no client. So we essentially all huddled and said, what would we do if we were the mayor or the city council or the county supervisor? And we came up with those 10 streams thinking, I'd want to start with a case study. We'd want to figure out how to accelerate the permitting process. We'd want to figure out what does the bank need, or how do we get insurance, not only on the construction loan, but on the takeout in a place that's hostile to insurance companies right now. So we were literally huddled together, just came up with those different lanes, and then just executed on that plan.
So now I want to turn it over to Professor Contreras. I won't forget your name ever again.
He might.
Yeah, I might. I'm getting older. So there's this group of people. They put together this report. They have a bunch of ideas. Now the community has to decide what it wants to do. Okay, so your expertise is in part in community engagement. So how do you reach the community? How do you find out what the community wants? How do you find out if what we're recommending has anything to do with what the community wants?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. So, I really appreciate the discussion because, one of the big things that comes up pretty consistently in terms of all the different, I've worked after a lot of different disasters, and so you mentioned a few of the big ones that there's been some reporting on. And there is this big issue that comes up in terms of how long all of this takes, particularly when you're thinking about the dynamics that are involved specifically in what we're facing in front of us in LA. And so I think all of this work that's been done, specifically what's being highlighted in the report, is really helpful in terms of thinking about all of these ways that we can speed up this process. I think where the community engagement piece comes in as something to sort of not necessarily put a pause point, but to sort of think about what all of these sort of ideas mean in terms of integrating that with what makes the most sense at the community level. And so a lot of the work that I do involves sort of doing a lot of mixed method work, but I do a lot of qualitative research. specifically working with communities that have been impacted by disasters, and talking with them and trying to get a sense of what are their needs, what are their interests, and specifically what that is looking like in terms of how it's getting incorporated into recovery activities. So this involves sort of taking a lot of time to sort of sit with folks, doing focus groups, doing interviews, sometimes it's doing surveys as well, and trying to sort of assess what the current sort of status of what recovery is looking like and align with a lot of these ideas. Because one of the things that we see pretty consistently is that while we want to make this happen as quickly as possible, and you usually won't get a lot of pushback from communities on that. Most people don't want to be out of their houses and disrupted in the way that they are for longer than needs to happen. But that can often lead to sort of this shortcutting in terms of how we want to engage with folks. And so there can be a very common thread where we want to sort of bypass any sort of conversations, deep engagement, check-in points, because a lot of folks might see community engagement as sort of a resistance in terms of what that means to our development interests or being able to sort of speed the process up. And there can be issues, and we can talk about those sorts of things, but typically it leads to better outcomes. It allows us to sort of see if all of these different sorts of things are meeting, are there things that are forgetting about that might be really important to sort of what's happening at the community level. If that's not gonna land well, it'll sort of help us with some of these resistance points that we've sort of already pointed out. And so that's kind of, I think, a big part of what I try to do is incorporate that into these conversations so that we don't get too far ahead of ourselves without having those check-in points in terms of thinking about what communities need.
So I'm going to ask you an unfair question because I didn't prep you on this one, but as you were talking, it occurs to me. So what are 2 or 3 questions that people in the community should be asked that probably aren't asked?
Yeah, so one of them is actually a pretty simple question, and I would honestly, I'll encourage a lot of us to think about this of, is this what you want, right? I think this is something that we don't tend to ask folks, right? We oftentimes go into this with a lot of assumptions about, again, as long as it's happening as quickly as possible. And there may be things, so we haven't yet had this conversation about what type of building sorts of strategies we're approaching. Are we thinking about more climate resilient solutions? There's different sorts of needs, and this is gonna vary also. We're dealing with 2 very different sites. And so asking those people specifically and them getting that opportunity to have that conversation is probably something that, based on the conversations that I've been having at the community level, isn't happening that frequently. And the second would be, is information getting to them in a way that is digestible and understandable? A lot of folks are talking about, there's a lot of great ideas, but not understanding where is the appropriate channel to be getting information, and it kind of seems like it's coming in a lot of different directions. And so asking those sorts of questions, I think, are 2 of the things that, at least at this point in the process, have been coming up quite a bit.
So Scott, I was with you last week, and we heard from James Gore, who's a county supervisor up in Sonoma County, who was a leader in the rebuild in Santa Rosa, which is sort of looked at as an example of something very successful. I mean, are we, given that example, are we going in the right direction, or are there things we should be thinking about that we're not thinking about yet?
So what Richard's referring to, our company, we hosted a symposium. And we do it every year. It's a housing symposium. And this year, the focus was not just on cities and state law, it was the fires. And what came out of that, which I was sharing with Santina, who's going to be doing my next report. So I was on 2 of the committees for ULI. I'm on a council, ULI, leadership, all these things. I think ULI did a great job. It has to go from being a policy paper to a playbook. So what we had at the symposium is we asked the students to put something together which is called Building Back Better. And it is a report on comparing Santa Rosa and Altadena. And there's some lessons to be learned from this, and we could do our own conference on this. But Santa Rosa from the Tubbs fire has done a relatively remarkable job, I would say, Richard, in their recovery.
No, when you look at nobody is built as thoroughly and quickly as they have.
As I told Santina, there are more homes in Santa Rosa today than there were in 2017 when the fires happened. Okay, that's a path to recovery. You got to meet Supervisor Gore. What you need is leadership. Right now, we are not part of the Builder Alliance. We're taking a position on the sidelines. I'm pretty comfortable saying I have built pretty much everything you can imagine in Southern California. From the City of LA podiums, 1,500 unit master plans, urban infill. Here's what I'm gonna tell you, it's complicated. Urban infill is very complicated. This is urban infill. What the questions I ask are, building is one thing, so I can build you a home. It's getting there. It's the path to get to build a home. When I've done huge master plans, we own the land, we're able to execute, it's ours. Okay, we can phase it, we can do the backbone infrastructure. We've been doing infill, I've been at the Olson Company since 2007. Infill's tough. You have existing utilities. You gotta figure out how to stage. You have all these neighbors. Everybody has a different opinion. The term that I would use with what's happening here, which I just told Richard, is a new term that I like, FAFO. Anybody know what that means? Yep. F around and find out. Okay? That's literally the term. I'm doing a presentation tomorrow, so I don't do a lot of these. This is something for our trade partners. I really feel that way with this. Someone has got to take the leadership to get things done and explain to someone, here is when you are going to be able to flush a toilet. Here is when you can take a shower, and here's when you can turn your lights on. That is very complicated. Building a house, I'm going to tell you, and I've been involved with building thousands and thousands. And this isn't like make-believe where you see someone says, oh, I built 15,000 homes and $15 billion or whatever they want. I've literally been involved in that. That's not the complicated part. But I think getting there is going to be the challenge. And that is where Santa Rosa was very focused on the path, what I would call to infrastructure. And there has to be a really clear path to infrastructure. And I think what you're doing is incredibly important, and that's why we're on the sidelines right now. Lew talked about 12,000 homes. That's 12,000 people. When I am doing 1,500 homes or 20, how many people are there? There's zero. I'm building them and then they're coming to buy them. Here you have 12,000 different ideas of what needs to be done. And I'm gonna tell you, certain parts of this have been tried before, and there's some real lessons to be learned by doing the most important thing, which doesn't happen all the time, and I'll leave it with this, it's called listening. So people need to listen a little bit more to what's happening out there.
So I want to follow up on that in a second, but first, I just want to ask the group a few questions. First of all, have any of you folks lost your own home? Okay, well, if you have thoughts, we would love to hear them before the evening is out. How many of you visited the Palisades or Eaton Canyon since the fires? Okay, so I'm a little surprised is that if this is something you really care about, you should go up there. I don't think you need to go to both, but go to at least one of them and see what this is like. It really is extraordinary, and I don't mean that in a good way. And the final question, which is a little off the wall, is how many of you are subscribers to Nextdoor, have the Nextdoor app? Okay, now overwhelmingly I hate the Nextdoor app because it's always about, somebody complaining about something where I think get a life, or fearing somebody that they really shouldn't fear, etc. But I found Nextdoor has been very helpful in terms of thinking about how people are feeling about the fires, because I live in Pasadena, so I'm on the Pasadena-Altadena Nextdoor. And one of the interesting debates that's going on is let the Corps of Engineers in and do their jobs versus no, I don't want them doing the job, I want to do it privately. So just at that fundamental level where you have people, and they all have they're not, when you read what people are saying, they're not being dumb. They have very good reasons for the views that they have. Is it in light of just a disagreement over that, Scott, is how do you overcome, you talk about listening, okay, you can listen, and you have people who are going to say, yes, we should all just let the Corps come in, do their job, let the trucks in and out as efficiently as possible, versus those that say, in part what Lew was talking about, no, they're not doing the testing, I don't trust what they're doing, the insurance company is going to charge me in the end anyway for it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you get common ground among a community given that at that fundamental level there's disagreement?
Yeah, I think, and that's the perfect example of FAFO. It is. It's like there is no one, when we're doing developments, and I deal with that, everything we do today, and some people in this room have worked with me, is contaminated. So none of that's like shocking. And if you're an urban infill, and you know this, it's
Yeah.
contaminated. There's a reason it's sitting there or it's going to be revitalized. The challenge is just having that clear direction, because I look at what's happening. There's confusion. So some of you may have heard the haul routes are supposed to go out PCH to the 10 to the 405. I live on Mandeville. It has never in my lifetime taken me so long to get out of the canyon to Sunset. And I take pictures and send them to people that I know. It is truck after truck after truck hauling. And there's a ton of debris that's going to need to continue to come out of there. But I think there are a lot of challenges ahead due to exactly what you're saying. Here's the problem it causes, in my opinion. And we can talk about the builder side of it at some point in this conversation as well. There is no set schedule for everybody.
Right.
And so I have friends that have lost their homes. I have friends whose homes survived. I have friends whose homes survived who wish they lost their homes. Okay? I'm
Tell
telling
us a
you,
little more about that, yeah.
they are one of my closest friends. Neighbor next door burnt down. All the homes across the street burnt down. He has 4 homes next to him. He was my, not next door like you talk about, my true next door neighbor when I lived in Rusticana before I moved to Mandeville. He is now back living above me. He thinks he has over $1 million of cleanup on his house through remediation. But he doesn't know, and this is why we're going to work together, what are you coming back to? This is not Disneyland. You're not going through the gate buying a ticket and, oh, the park's back, the library's back, the school's back. I think we have to really figure out what's coming back, and that's going to be part of the challenge. And I think ULI laid the foundation of what's happening out there, but everybody has to figure out, and this is what I'm talking about, Richard. I kind of feel like there's great options. Some of them were identified in the ULI report. It's very well done. There are so many options, and the issue is there are so many problems, but there's a huge camp that just wants to talk about problems, which are some of the things you're referring to, and that's here. And then there's the solution camp, and they're like this. And at some point, these two have to align, and then you can start getting things done. But just to wrap up that piece of it, the great thing would have been if everybody could have agreed, and we're all going to sit on our hands, and we're all going to wait together until our lots get cleaned up. But that can't happen when you own your lot and you own yours, and we all have different choices.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, I think this listening piece is why this is really important, because I think there's this, we're currently also in a state of sort of avoidance on a lot of this, because there's this assumption that no one can get on the same page, and it is going to be a difficult conversation. But I think being able to present all of these options, we've talked about this before, presenting these things to people. What does this look like if you go with this option? This is how long it's going to take. This is what it's going to look like. Having that full-bodied conversation with all of these people in the room is sort of that first step, and it will be really difficult, but that's part of what is going to have to happen to get those solutions in place, and at least there will be more buy-in through the process and ways to sort of think about alleviating the issues that people are not, things that are not getting met. There will be opportunities to sort of have those conversations about what that's going to look like going down the line versus sort of not doing any of it. And so I think that's part of the reason why that listening piece becomes really important.
But all of this is, going back to what Scott was saying, there is an unpredictability as it relates to the infrastructure piece. So even, and that's only basically 4 property owners, right? It's the city of Malibu, the city of Los Angeles, the county of Los Angeles, and the city of Sierra Madre, I think, and probably a little bit of Pasadena. But that's a very few number of constituents that need to get together to figure out the infrastructure piece of it. Because without having that infrastructure piece solved, you can't solve the timing on the homes. Because you don't know when you're gonna be able to flush your toilet, if you don't know when, or even if, the sewer line's gonna have to be replaced. And that's part of the argument that we've really been making on this is we've got to do an assessment, we being the global, leadership of our cities and county, is that we have to really do an assessment of what that infrastructure looks like, because we simply don't know. Hasn't been tested yet.
And we haven't even talked about rebuilding in a way that's more resilient than what we had
Right.
before. right? And that's another complication.
And that's what the UCLA and the county have, that Blue Ribbon Commission that's looking at how do you build back with greater resiliency, and how is that all going to work? And that's before we can even get to
Gotcha.
that listening tour, or starting to figure out if you're going to do customs homes or big groups of homes. We can't even answer that until we know what that infrastructure piece is. And that's one of those things that we really highlighted in our analysis is, and that affects every single piece of this.
And
I think,
Richard,
Richard,
I'd
I
add-
think you've
go ahead,
also,
Lou.
I think the county and the city have got to really stay in their lane, though. And I think what the community needs is certainty around finishing the infrastructure and finishing those lots so that they can build. Because then it's really going to be more of a private process if we can find an accelerated way to permit. But the county said it the best. We had a meeting last week with the county, and they said, we're not particularly good at the resident. We're really good at the infrastructure. So you got to make sure those streets are going to be ripped apart. The sewer's highly likely you're going to need work at least on a full replacement, or you're going to need a lot of replacement of those sewer lines. And then there's a big demand to underground, to build it better back so that you can actually underground the power lines, underground the power. You put all that together, then you got to figure out how to price it. And I think that's what we're going through today. And we've put a lot of work into, in the report, you can see it, on what kind of money can you find through increment financing and building zones around that in a Melrose fashion where you can actually, drill down to the increment, figure out how to pay for it. We think that gets you it doesn't get you all the way through that payment cycle. It gets you pretty close, but it depends. If you have to replace both, it gets you maybe halfway there. So at the end of the day, you've got to figure out all of that, and then you've got to get out of the way. And then just make sure that these permitting processes can happen as quickly as possible.
So there's a gentleman yes, please.
First off, thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it. And I think the paper did a very good job highlighting things that are technically available and tools that are available, like TIF. You were just saying that.
Right.
But I think, and also you were mentioning, Claire, that the county has done a pretty good job being receptive and moving quickly on this. But now that this paper has been there and converting it to a playbook, who's actually there to effectuate it?
Well, I can tell you that because we're meeting on a regular basis. We have a weekly meeting set up with the city and the county. And we're meeting with staff. We first presented the report just before we released it to the public. We presented it to the staff, and then we presented it to the mayor, and we presented it to the supervisor. Because they, at the end of the day, are the people that actually control the land use. So we looked at them as our assumed client. And then we released it. There's another dozen organizations that are out there doing great work. And we released it to those other organizations and just said, here it is, it's free, improve it. This was our first crack. We did this in 6 weeks. We had individual subject matter experts as leaders that were incredible, that Claire put together. They all had small, nimble teams, and they all built a great product. Like I said, it's not one report, it really is 10, and including the case study work. We worked with, and so I think we released all of that out there. Today we've got to figure out, we've had great meetings with the county board. We've had great meetings with the mayor and the deputy mayors. At the end of the day, the city's got 14 different departments, and those departments act independently. So there really is no way to get into those departments and to have the authority to make any kind of a change. If the building and safety department does not want to execute on a self-certification program, they're not going to. And that really isn't, there's not a person that can say, you must do this at the city level or the county level. So part of this is you've got to get buy-in on an existing infrastructure, both very different, by the way. The county and the city are very different structures, leadership structures. You've got to get buy-in with those departments, and you've got to take away any threat, and you've got to basically drill down and say, this is a system that we believe works. There's no increase in your existing liability. This is something that's working in New York, by the way. It's working in Phoenix. It's working in, there's testing that's going on. The Steadfast folks have got a group that's been testing out in Austin on AI work. This has all been, these are not academic exercises. These are working models that are working in other large cities and other urban areas. So we just need to have the confidence in our leadership and have these different siloed divisions have the ability to execute on some new creative ideas. And I hope we can. Otherwise, to your point, Scott, you're going to have, instead of one master plan, you've got 12,000 concrete trucks, 12,000, how are you going to, the labor issue to just handle that? We're trying to figure out, where do you put the labor on something like this?
And one thing to touch on that that's really important, I think is getting lost in this. Who's building all this? Who's paying for it all? We have something called the Olympics. City needs to be fixed in many areas. Someone I know that has a house up in the Chautauqua that survived, it was under construction. How about getting inspectors? It's all these things.
Right.
It's a realignment of priorities, but also making sure the people are there.
Right.
Because for those of us building in the county or the city, it was already challenging from a staffing perspective before the fire. So it's just figuring that out, and then you're going to have the labor. And one thing I mentioned to Richard is, where's that labor going to be coming from?
It's a problem, and I'm sorry, Claire, you've been trying to get
So,
in.
so two things. One, the city is actually also out in the market right now trying to hire a chief recovery and resilience officer. So hopefully that person will be empowered
That's
to
really key.
give direction to those 15 departments that Lew is referencing. Because if you don't have somebody who is empowered to cause change and empowered to implement action, then it's not going to matter if you have 20 people in that role.
Yeah. Let me give you 2 metrics. The first metric is that for every year, our study, when one of the teams described it, every year that there's a delay, there's 20% of the population falls off and doesn't return. So 3 years, 60%. 4 years, 80%. So there's an urgency to this of moving quickly, getting it right, building it correctly, building it better, but moving quickly. The other piece is we studied the the supply chain issue at peak in both communities. There's going to be 300 new permits a month, brand new permits a month coming in to these inspectors and coming into these agencies. And we just don't believe that they're built to be able to handle that. So whether it's self-certification, whether it's an AI generated, whether it's a hybrid of the two, whether it's an outsourcing, there's got to be some other plan other than business as usual.
And I hate to add more negativeness to this, but on labor, 40% of construction labor in California was born somewhere other than the United States. And as it is, and people were starting to think, well, housing starts have gone down a lot because of interest rates, which is true. So you'd free up labor. Well, because of the Build Back Better plan, and this is not a criticism of that. I like it, but we're building airports, we're building subways, we're building a lot of public infrastructure. Guess what that takes? Construction labor. So labor is a problem, and obviously we don't know what tariffs are going to be on lumber tomorrow or on cement tomorrow, but you can't build, or steel tomorrow. If you don't like the tariff today, wait another day and maybe you'll like it better. But we're facing all of that too, which means these gaps that we estimated in this report, and we worked really hard on doing a good job, are almost certainly too small now. Yep. That they're larger than that.
Well, and on the labor issue, that's 30 to 40,000 laborers that are going to be working every day to build this, and where you can't have any more people on Sunset Boulevard.
Nope.
You just. There has to be, and that's sort of that Builders Alliance idea or concept, is that there's some central location where we can put the laborers.
Where you can do staging.
Yeah, but where people can live.
And where do you house them?
Yeah, exactly.
But there's not enough labor. And our trades today are actually very fearful of deportation. Okay, that's real out there. And that's a different discussion, but you've got a lot of forces. Tariffs are one thing, so it's getting more expensive. There wasn't enough labor before this happened. We already had a housing shortage. So they're just things that need to be figured out. You almost need to start training people for a rebuild to increase the labor force today, seeing what's about to come. You're gonna be in a time period where, since the Palisades was first created, this number of homes has not been built at the same time. And that, I'm going to make one comment on this. People need to change their mindset and start thinking differently. And that is what, as you heard, was a big difference in Santa Rosa. Density is such a bad word. What happened in Santa Rosa and expedited the recovery was density in the right areas and utilizing ADUs and SB9s. I think people need to understand the tools that are available for them, and it goes back to trust. So if I'm in the Alphabet Streets and you're telling me I'm going to widen the Alphabet Streets, you're like, how in the world are you doing that? And I've told people, I would say, we're going to widen the Alphabet Streets, but we're actually going to change your setback. So you can now build, and this is not a fact, I'm just random, you can now build 5 feet to the sidewalk. Okay? So you can pick that space up and still have the footprint. And there's things that I think create this lack of trust. I heard someone saying, oh, they're going to require 20-foot, you've heard this one, setbacks on each side. I said, you can't even put a trailer on that lot. Like, what are you doing?
You'd have like 62-story
that.
pencil buildings.
So I think that's just, if you explain to someone, here's what we really mean, and for all of us in the development world, we deal with that, where we hear it's like, oh my God, I can't believe they just told us that, and then you're like, okay, well, that's not what they really meant. We're going to go back and figure it out.
Well, I'm sorry. Go
And I
ahead,
just want to say,
Santina.
and I think this is again another shout out for the community engagement being a priority, because a lot of times what happens is you get a lot of resistance, but that resistance is partially because people aren't getting informed in the way to be able to understand how. So I think having these conversations where there's a education forum, we're explaining to people what's going to happen, what are the options, then you don't get as much fear in terms of what might come about. And so that's kind of why we want to be doing that in consultation as we keep moving forward, so that people are not completely shocked and out of the loop when it gets to that point.
Well, I think one thing I do want to mention here, ADUs, because as Lew said, we have a real problem with people being underinsured, and so they really don't have enough money to rebuild. But ADUs may be a way, and they're financeable. It could be a way that people gain basically the gap that they need in order to reinsure it. And one thing, and if people want to disagree with me, I'd be curious as to your views, but with California's ADU law that basically says anybody can put an ADU on any lot, my sense is the attitude toward ADUs has changed in the last 6 or 7 years, that people are much more positively disposed to them now than they were before that law was passed. My neighborhood, people were terrified at the idea. Now everybody's, well, not everybody, but I'm using hyperbole, but a lot of people are building them because they're recognizing that either it's a way that their kids can live there or their parents can live there, or they can help pay a mortgage that's otherwise very difficult to pay. And so I think being open-minded about that, and that might be an easier thing to convince people about. I do want to come at, so I have very specific questions for Santina and Lew, but before I get into that, I want to ask the panel a broader question, which is, what about those who just don't want to stay, who want to move on? Do we need to think about how we help those people? And if so, how do we help those
I'll
people?
tell you how you don't help them. You don't restrict who they can sell to. And you don't put some moratorium that a developer can't buy a lot. If I need to sell a lot, I'm agnostic as to who's going to buy it. I need to sell my lot. So I think we stay away from any kind of regulation on that and just allow people to make their own individual decisions. And I don't think it's a great idea right now to sell. And there's a ton coming on the market in both communities, because people they're uncertain about the uncertainty, and they don't know when they can start construction. So I just think you got to be real careful about watching out for the evil developer. I just think that if I need to sell my lot, don't get in my way.
I also think having predictability about what does a clean lot look like. So is there a certificate or a stamp or something that you can get that says you are selling a clean lot? Because that's the only way that whoever buys that lot is going to get
Well, you gotta
financing
get
and be able to
test.
insurance.
You gotta get
exactly,
test.
exactly. And so there has to be certainty. And right now there's, what we do on a commercial site is different from what Scott would have to do on a residential site to get a no further action letter for the soil contamination. There's no single process or set of standards for testing these lots, and so we've got to have some certainty and predictability for that. And I think that's one thing that's going to make anybody who wants to sell, it's going to make it so much easier for them to do that. I think that's a totally doable thing.
Well, and we're on that. We're actually doing that with
Yeah.
Preston's team. We're actually creating a set of standards on those tests so that we can price it accordingly. Because right now, I had 18 employees that lost homes. One came into my office the other day and he was saying, I'm going out to getting quotes on tests. And I said, well, what kind of testing are you going to do? And he goes, I don't know, I'm just talking to the testing companies. Well, that's the right answer is, what's my bank want? Because your bank is the one that really ultimately is going to make the decision as to whether or not they're going to give you that loan or not. It's going to be based on, their confidence in that test. So we do need to create a test standard. And I think we're already working with the banks and the lawyers to make sure that there is a standard that we can price accordingly and that everybody's going to be comfortable with.
And I just wanted to add, I might have a little bit of a different take on this, and this may be a bit of a controversial statement, I think, in this room, but this idea of sort of the big scary developer, I do think we need to sort of combat that. There's, I think, this opportunities that we do need to be thinking collectively, but there is a real issue going on in terms of the equity dynamics that are happening for a lot of folks. And so people being scared, nervous, not fully understanding what's ahead of them, and making those decisions early on, which may not be in their best financial interests down the road, is something that I think is part of that conversation of why these protections and thinking about how we should be framing this and what we should be allowing from a development standpoint is why that's an important part of the conversation. And so I think my big thing to Richard's question in terms of if people want to go or stay, there's a very big difference between people having to leave because they have no other options versus being able to make that informed decision and that makes the most financial sense for them versus there's just no other way out. And so I think that is something that we have to think about. And again, it's unfolding differently in each of the sites, but specifically when we're thinking about Altadena, these are things that are real concerns, and that's part of, I think, why that conversation is coming up.
But that's the Palisades too.
Yeah.
And I think that somewhat gets ignored. Not everybody had endless amounts of money there.
Agreed.
And I agree with both of you. So what you're talking about is education. And what Lew's talking about is no one should be prohibited from selling their lot. And the sale of the lot shouldn't be undermined by things like 110%. So if I had a house that I bought 50 years ago and it's 2,000 square feet, but my neighbor has a house with a basement and it's 5,000 square feet, and yes, it takes out the CEQA and other things, everything should be an even playing field because there's only three choices. Yep. You're either selling your lot, you're building your house, or you're building and then you're selling. So you're going to be a spec builder. And just so most people understand, for a company like mine, there is my only interest in any of this is born and raised in LA. That's all I care about. The city is such an incredible city. This is a monumental loss. Most builders do not want to get involved in this. It is so complicated. When I do infill developments or master plans, whatever I've done, I'm in control. I sell Clare the house. She pays me through escrow. Think about the process of the trades. It's going to be complicated, and that's where everybody's going to need to work together, because I agree with Lew and Clare. The builders can be incredibly helpful for scale on labor and cost, but there also has to be an understanding. I think there's more of this in Altadena. We're talking to a group out there that is already for the neighborhood, developing their own plans with architects that were in the neighborhood, and they're like, we want to go. And I think that's that mindset. So if our company knows they want to go, then it's like, okay, we'll come in and help you.
And they ended up coming up with, I think if this is the same group, they came up with 5 standard models. One of them is like Spanish style, one of them is a very contemporary building, one of them is a mid-century modern looking house. And that all felt like what Altadena looked like before the fire. And so, and they had 5 different architects come up with them. And basically they're pre-certifying or pre-approving, getting all those buildings pre-approved. So you can go in and say, I want this house and have it fit to your site, but it's basically a pre-approved building that can come in and sit down. And it's like the best example of what Scott's company does is you can come in and you can build, if he ends up doing all of the mid-century houses, he can come in and knock out every single one of those houses with such alacrity that no one else can be able to do. No individual could actually do it anywhere near as quickly or as cost effectively as a company like his.
And you can purchase to scale. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you can buy to scale at 5 or 50 homes at a time, that is a real benefit to lowering that price point down to something that's going to be more reasonable and probably insured.
And what does not work here, just to wrap this up, in this conversation, and this is the problem that's been faced at other times when bigger builders have come in for a rebuild effort, is Lew is down the path, we're going to pull the permit, and he says to me, I really would love a breakfast nook. So if you could extend out 5 feet.
No breakfast nook.
You know what? We have the garage is popping out. Why don't we build a gym or extra bedroom over there, and then it's like, oh my God, here we go. And it's got to be to price it to some of these numbers you're hearing. And by the way, the numbers are everywhere, from 300 or 400 to 1,200. It's all going to depend. It goes back to the buyer. What's your expectation? And really understanding what is a $300 house. I told Richard I can build him a great $150 house. That is not going to be the house for Altadena or the Palisades. So it's just making sure that everybody understands what the expectation is going to be on that rebuild, and that's the listening and just building trust. And I think there's a path there.
I do want to follow up on Santina's comment on equity issues. One thing about Altadena is it's substantially more African American than Los Angeles County as a whole, and the home ownership rate among African Americans is 77%. That compares with about 40% in LA County as a whole. So it is a community of black homeowners. Now, one of the things, when you look at American Community Survey data, and you look at the share of black homeowners in Altadena who are multi-generational households, it's 16%. That compares with LA County, where multi-generational householders overall among homeowners is about 4%. Okay, what does that mean? It means that it's harder for such families to get financing, and so they are at a disadvantage. Why is it harder for them to get financing? Because generally all of the incomes in those houses are going toward paying a mortgage. That is, if they have a mortgage. And so when they apply for a loan, the lender is either going to look at the incomes of what I'll call the middle couple. You have the grandparents, the parents, and the kids, the parent couple. Or they will count everyone, but then they assign the lowest FICO score of that household to their underwriting. And the problem is old folks tend to have thin credit files. They don't use credit cards very much anymore. So their FICO scores are really low, so their mortgage pricing is really bad. So I think we want to be sensitive to the fact that there are people who are going to be in a worse financial position, again, for no fault of their own relative to others, and that could influence their sense of desperation in terms of what they decide to do next. So this is not, again, an academic exercise. This is real people who are facing different circumstances, in part because of a result of a very long history.
And Richard, oh, by the way, your payment doubled.
Because of the change in
the
interest
market.
rates.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so Lew, I want you to hit on one point on household finance, then I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions. But you've been on the calls with us talking to banks, and there are a couple of problems. One is if you have to refinance your home loan, you're going to go from, the average interest rate people are paying now is about 4% in these two markets, according to CoreLogic data. Last I looked a couple of hours ago, 30-year mortgages are about 6.8 at the moment. Okay, that means all by itself a 50% increase in your payment for the same amount. But on top of that, again, they're going to need another loan on top of that in order to get the financing they need to rebuild because of how underinsured they are. And the guy from Citibank told us what is 3/4 of people are at least $100,000 underinsured, or something like that.
Yeah,
so how do we deal with this?
Well, first of all, the first discussion people have is forbearance. They want to know, can I just stop making my payments and still be okay on my loan? But here's the way forbearance works. Right now, generally you can get it's an easy over-the-counter conversation for 90 days, but I think the banks will probably go to 2 years. But at the end of that 2 years, they want all the money back and they want the interest. So it really doesn't work for many people. It's not really a great solution. So then it's all about how do I protect that 2 or 3% or 4%? You're saying it's average of 4. A lot of them are a lot
lower than that.
Yeah,
I was surprised actually at how high the average was.
How do you protect that? We've even looked at, could you put that in the second position and go out and get and right now I don't think that can happen. We've got a group of 10 banks being organized by the Bank of America and an individual there that's actually been dedicated by the CEO of the Bank of America to actually help the LA fire victims, which is phenomenal. And I will say this, we're seeing incredible people coming out in the insurance industry and the finance industry. And like Claire said on that ULI report and the UCLA and SC report, we had over 100 people working on that pro bono. And so that report has got incredible thinking in it, and it was pencils down. People quit their day jobs for 6 weeks. But I would say the financing is a serious issue.
No,
It's
because
a
when I
very
was
serious
listening to
issue.
the bank, I mean, they're still talking about using traditional underwriting
Yeah,
in
for
terms
sure.
of the mortgages they make.
Well,
And if
here's
they do
one-
that,
but here's one thing
Yeah.
that we just actually came up with, which is to build it. You know this, Scott. You get a construction loan. You got to have construction loan insurance, and then you got to go out and get another insurance policy once you do a takeout. We actually, one of the guys on our committee came up with this idea of, and he went to Lloyd's and actually got this program approved, where you can get a construction loan insurance policy that will roll into a permanent loan. And he's set that up for Altadena and Palisades. Lloyd's will back it for the first $250 million. And he believes that other banks or other insurance companies will follow suit. That's a creative thought. That's a really creative thought. And so we're actually having the banks work with his team to say, let's couple the new loan to that loan so that you're not getting crushed by the insurance company, because we don't know what those premiums are going to be.
so let's open it up for, yeah, Wes.
On the topic of household finance, I know there's uncertainty potentially right now with FEMA, but in the past, hasn't FEMA played a role with small business administration loans offering subsidized rates that would play a role here, especially in a higher interest rate environment?
Yeah, it has. But from what I understand, this is absolutely not my area of expertise. From what I understand, the amounts that they're able to do are not, they're just not material. They're great for a small disaster, but for something on this scale, the amount that they can actually impact is actually nominal.
And there's SBA also, right? But that's the same thing. It's just not enough.
So that, a woman in the USC sweatshirt, please.
Hi, thank you so much. And so a question. So I read an article about the empty houses mainly invested by foreign owners, like wealthy people from China, in San Marino. So after the LA fire, there are a lot of people evacuated from the fire who needs a place to live. So like I want to ask, like, since there are so many foreign-owned homes but sit empty there, will this kind of homes drive up prices in areas where people actually want to live? And another question is, does that slow down rebuilding after the wildfires?
Sorry, what was the second question?
The second question is, does that slow down the rebuilding after the wildfires?
So the foreign ownership of homes slowed down the rebuilding after the wildfire?
No, actually the first question is, since like these people left their homes empty there, so will it drive up the prices in the areas where people actually want to live, especially after wildfires, a lot of like rooms, like houses got burned?
Well, the answer to that question is yes.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
see what's happened in Brentwood or Pasadena or San Marino,
That's
the
scarcity.
housing has shot up. I had a friend that was looking for a house for one of his children who lost a house in Brentwood, and there were 15 people in this open house, and the house went for like 40% more than the asking, and there was multiple offers on it. I mean, so because part of it is parents with kids in school, so they're protecting, and when one of the spouses says, "Give me a house," all of a sudden your price so the pricing is already shot up. Absolutely.
You
On the
already
second-
had a housing crisis.
Right.
Okay, and an
Right.
affordability crisis and equity issues across the state. So Richard was at our symposium. We had 50 cities there. My message to those cities is this is not just a Malibu, Altadena, Palisades, this is everybody's problem.
Right.
And we need to build more.
Right.
And we need
Everywhere.
to relook at things everywhere. We're building in the San Gabriel Valley. Yes, there aren't enough homes. That's why it's so expensive. It's not coming down. And then you lose, like Lew's talking about, 12,000 homes.
Right.
You know how long it takes to build 12,000 homes? I mean, we're not even
Yeah,
close
so
to
the
that.
whole, in LA County, we generally build 24,000 homes in a year. So you're talking about 6 months of homes all at once,
Yep.
essentially. Yeah. I'm trying to think order here, so I'm trying to be fair. I think, gentleman with the beard with his hands up, I think you were trying to get in before. I know a lot of, you know which one I'm talking? Start talking and I'll tell you if you're the one I'm talking. Yeah, there you go.
That beard.
So my question is, it seems like obviously you guys are trying to move mountains to build it back and build it better. And so I guess the question is, what are some of the happens again?
Well, there's a lot, I'm going to let Scott address this specifically, but there's a lot of ideas that are out there. And the ULI Resiliency Advisory Service Panel has every kind of idea, from building materials to, setbacks to landscaping. But like the Blue Ribbon Commission that I mentioned earlier that the county has, they're looking at, ideas of, do you have a chaparral barrier between the mountains and where you start building houses, and how is that managed and how is that maintained, and how do you know if it's going to be big enough to actually be a proper fire break? And so there's so many things that people are looking at and studying right now to make sure that when we do this, that the materials we're using and the way that we're doing it is definitely going to be safer and more resilient.
Yeah, and I think ULI did a great job on resilience, but I think we got to redefine what that even means going forward. And the insurance companies are going to be telling us that somewhat. The banks are going to be telling us these things. In reality, you would want to shrink the boundary of where you're building and create this buffer zone. And we were all in the middle of this. It's really hard to fight a fire from within the fire.
Right.
And there's no boundary around you. I mean, I'm lucky to have a house. These firefighters are heroic in what they did in the canyon. I couldn't believe what they did. They were trapped in there, and they fought this fire. And if that fire went through Mandeville, and I know this for a fact, it was going to the 405 freeway and the 101, and that's where they were going to fight it from. So thank God it was a disaster what's occurred. It's pretty horrific. It could have been worse. But I think when we're looking to rebuild, that's the challenge, though. When you look at Santa Rosa, you saw some of this, Richard. They changed how you landscape around the house. They created buffers. They created where the density should and shouldn't be. But it's hard to say to you, I'm not going to allow you to rebuild your house. But remember, we do have something, and I'm not saying by any means this is what should be done. When they build the freeway, there's eminent domain. And what happens is, and I lived in one of these homes, the home actually got sold for more than it was worth before Caltrans bought it. It was actually a great deal for the person that had the house. I don't know if we're going there. I think some of the things Lew is talking about are really actually important, not just on how we're going to rebuild. You were talking about the financing. What I keep looking at, there has been hundreds of millions of dollars contributed. When we're selling homes, we have very special programs from Bank of America, City National, others. It's like, let's figure out a mechanism to take some of that money and get that money into people to help them with refinancing their homes, figuring out insurance for these people, because I don't like Build Back Better. I think a lot of people just want to build back. I think things like master plan, Build Back Better, and I completely understand what you're saying, by the way.
But
we should do
I want to mention that the Voorhees family gave Jen Giuliano and me money to do a study on the impact of materials on survivability. And the county assessor has been very generous with us. And so we know for every lot in LA County, sort of fundamentally the materials that house is made out of. The report is due May 15th, so come back on May 15th. We may be able to give you some answers.
But aren't you looking at the vintage of homes too, to be
Yes,
able to
we
say
are.
that homes built in
Yes.
1920? I love what Richard's doing. I've talked to a lot of people about it. I think that's going to be an interesting exercise to go back and say 100% of the homes that were built from 1920 to 1942 didn't make it through the fires.
Yeah, it
But-
turns out that didn't happen.
Yeah,
but-
I've heard that, by the way, because that's where you would have thought on resiliency. It's
Right.
like, do sprinklers go inside the house? Next time I do a house, I'm putting them on the roof. I'm not really worried anymore about having sprinklers in my house. And I know a story from someone that called me directly who thought their house survived, but there was an ember. And they actually were watering the outside of their house in Altadena, and there was an ember in the attic, and they never thought to go in the attic.
Santina.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, so I had done some work after the wildfire in Colorado in 2020, and they had struggled with a little bit of this around this idea of building back with sort of climate resilience in mind. And so they had some mandates where it was sort of required to do all of the climate related things. It had gone in place right before the fire happened. So when the rebuilding started, it became this big conflict because all of these homeowners were like, this is going to be so expensive for us to have to add these things. And so there was a real pushback. They reduced those requirements. So I have some colleagues that did some work, specifically working with some of the homeowners. And what they ended up finding was that when they, again, started having conversations with folks, talked to them about what their cost savings over time were going to be, a lot of them, even with the mandates put down, still put in a lot of those things after they kind of learned more about what that was going to look like. But there was a big uproar just in terms of the idea, because of this idea that it doesn't need to be better, it's going to take longer. And through some a lot of educational sort of outreach sort of activities, it ended up actually still becoming more resilient. But it did take some extra effort to be able to get those things still in place once it wasn't required. So I think that's some ways it's happened before.
I also think the resilience piece has got to go along with the infrastructure as well. So the water lines, the reservoirs, all of that's got to be considered. Obviously, we saw that in Palisades particularly. But the infrastructure of the Palisades was 80, 90 years old. So you've got old pipes. So if you actually had more efficient water systems that could actually prevent or suppress fire once it starts, that would be helpful. The building piece, a lot of when on the Caruso Village, all that wood siding, that's not wood, that's concrete. It looks like wood. And so there's a whole bunch of things you can do. I think we looked at that at about $125 a foot to completely fireproof your house. And that would be the right building materials. It would be the right venting. It would be the right, hardscaping around it. There's a lot of things that could be done, but it's got to be done at that level. And I also think it would be nice if we could get a conversation with the insurance company that say, okay, if I put a sprinkler on the top of my roof, what does that do to my premium? But it's very difficult right now to have conversations in the insurance industry because we don't see anybody that really represents them.
We had a conference on insurance last week here that Wes helped organize, and one of the things the insurance companies told us is people expect dollar for dollar reduction for these mitigants, and we're not going to give them that. We're going to share it with them, but
just a range though would
but,
be nice.
But yeah, they'll get this
have a conversation.
But think about what Lew is saying, though, for all of us. Who checked their homeowner's insurance policy after this happened?
Oh,
yeah, okay.
right.
Most of us have now realized we kind of knew we were underinsured, and then we really realized how underinsured we are. And then what do you think about next? How do I harden my house?
Right.
I have open eaves. Should I stucco my eaves? I'm starting to look at the landscaping around my house, all these different things. It's not just the burn areas, it's everywhere.
And did you insure for a complete burn or did you insure for a partial burn? Because nobody thought it was going to be a complete wipeout. You're rebuilding your
Total
foundation.
loss.
It's a total loss.
You're insuring for a kitchen fire.
Yeah,
You're not for a disaster like this.
Okay, so it's Jeff Collins came all the way from Orange County. I'm going to have him ask a question.
The authorities are always talking about recovery and resilience, and it seems to me, I've always been confused by that because they seem to be diametrically opposed. And one example is, Scott just mentioned, setbacks are going to be smaller. The IBHS Institute for Building and Home Safety issued a report, that's basically a letter, calling for bigger setbacks, so you don't get a home-to-home spread. The other thing is the new fire maps, the hazard zones for Altadena only include like a quarter of the homes that burn down. So those 3/4 of the homes that burn down don't have to meet what's called Chapter 7A Wildfire Building Code. So the county has to now, decide by July 22nd if they're going to expand that zone to cover the entire footprint. So how do you deal with those diametrically opposed issues at the same time? Do you recover, or do you build back resilient and take longer and more expensive?
I personally, I think you can certainly look at the building codes. We can do the best we can there, but people want choices because there's a cost associated with all of it. And so I don't think we want to over-legislate right now because there is an issue on speed. Go back to my metric around 20% per year. To change, we do need to change the building code. There's no question about that. But to your point, Scott, you can't start reducing setbacks and then calling up for a 110% improvement on your lot. Something's got to give. So I do, this fire went house to house. Typically fires will go tree to a house or tree, the surroundings burn. This one was because the houses were so close. It went rooftop to rooftop to rooftop and then would blow out and it was a disaster. And so it is a rub, but I just think we got to be careful about over legislating here. I'd like on your setback issue or widening that street. You got to get every single and to have an eminent domain discussion right now in these communities, I would not want to be the one on the microphone on that one.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah.
So there's, I think the gentleman in the back has been doing it for a while. I think we'll take 2 more questions and then we're going to call it a night. So.
Infrastructure appears to be the critical path.
Yep.
You can't bring lumber on site so you have water. I'm not building a house so I know I can flush the toilet when I'm done if the sewers aren't in place. If I build, which I've done in Sierra Madre, I go to the city manager and I get all 10 departments to come down and meet in 1 meeting. I can't call a city manager and I can't get 15 departments ever in the city of LA or LA County to meet with me all at once to resolve things. How do we politically solve the logjam of getting infrastructure down when you have 15 different fiefdoms that have no one in charge?
Well, that's actually one of the big recommendations, and that's actually what both the city and the county, I believe, are going to be doing, which is having this one-stop shop where you come in and you actually have representatives from each one of those city departments that will stamp your plans at that time. And so that one-stop shop is both the city and the county are pretty close to making that, to adopting that process.
I think maybe I think what he's saying, at least my interpretation of this question, is that who is the engineering firm that's stepping up with a project manager to take the lead on implementing the stuff on the ground, the infrastructure? I think before we can get to the stuff that
That's the county and the city. That's not, I mean, those contractors, there's RFIs going out right now at the city level to at least figure out who they're going to interview to actually build that. And we believe that they'll probably hire multiple firms so that they can move quickly on the infrastructure rebuild.
Okay, the gentleman standing in the back has been very patient, so.
My question actually piggybacks on both of them. It's also kind of a public policy question. For every single one of the houses, you're going to have to establish the existing topography, the soil testing, the previous square footage to be able to shade on the permit what is the 110% improvement. So every single homeowner is going to have to go through that same permitting process. So could that RFP be extended to do all of that testing ahead of time for the homeowners? And right now we have an opportunity where it could just be widespread before you have other people living on site or starting construction.
Are you referring to the hazardous material testing?
Well, yeah, it would be soil testing.
Yeah.
I mean, the hazard material has already been removed, right? They've already identified that. But now you have, I believe they're taking about 6 inches off the topsoil, but you still want to go in and test, okay,
Yeah.
below 6 inches, is that sufficient?
So UCLA is right now doing 1,200 sites that they're testing as part of a pilot program. One of the things that we're doing, and we're actually having this meeting Thursday. I don't know, we have so many damn meetings. I think we're having a meeting on Thursday with a group of philanthropists to see if we can get them to fund the testing for every single site. And we have a protocol for it, we have a standard for it that we're hopefully is coming together right now. And so I think that will be able to be done. As far as soil testing for if you live in a hillside and do you need caissons and all the other questions along those lines, I think that is going to have to be I don't know that there's a way to do that on a universal basis.
Here's your issue, though. The Army Corps typically does 3 inches. They remove 3 inches, and then they say you're on your own. In this case, they went down 6 inches. I had a direct conversation with them, and they said if they go down any further, they're eventually going to find something, and it's not going to have anything to do with the fire.
No,
So
it's just being in LA. Like
at some
we
point,
can tell you that.
they just say I think we're really pretty sure that we got it all, but it's a little bit like your cancer doctor saying, I think I got it. I think so.
Yeah, and then Lou, you're
The
gonna
banks
have,
aren't going to accept it.
well, you're gonna put vapor barriers under every house.
Yeah.
I agree with Lou on that, by the way, particularly some of the older homes. You go anywhere in LA and you're right,
You're
Claire,
gonna
you
find
start digging
something.
deeper,
Yeah.
maybe you'll find a
I mean,
mastodon.
we
These are oil
live in an
fields.
oil field.
These are oil
This is
fields.
so you're
Beyond the soil testing.
La Brea, yes.
You have to have feasibility studies for what utility connections are feasible, which ones need to be abandoned, the topography of
So those are on AI programs right now. There are programs out there right now that we're looking at on this self-certification idea that have the topography down to a foot. And they have the footprint of the existing house and all your neighbor's house. And they've got, what's burned and what hasn't burned, what's been partial and what's been complete on burns. So there's AI programming that can accelerate that process. But each one of those at the city, to this other gentleman's comment, those are different departments. I mean, you said a lot in that sentence. I mean, you've got a planning issue, which is the setback issue and what can I build, and then you've got the building and safety and the utilities, and which is, what's physically going to be, underneath the roof. And so there's a bunch of different groups that actually have to see that, and that's what takes the time.
So I know we could stand here for another 3 hours, but all of our panelists have already had long days today. So I think let's just thank Lew, Santina, Scott, and Claire for a very informative panel. And thank you all very much for coming, and take a look at Restructured News, and we'll see you at another event.